Hi, this is Daniel with Unrivaled Investing. Today we're going to be talking about the fast-growing company Slack Technologies. The ticker is WORK, W-O-R-K. In full disclosure, I own a starter position in Slack Technologies. That's how much I like the company. I'm still learning about it. I still like it. I'm hoping for a better valuation. But let's dig in on what I'm hoping to cover in this video for you to learn about Slack Technologies. So the overview of what we're trying to accomplish with this video is what is Slack, what is their business model, what is their market potential, do they have an unrivaled value proposition? That's the lens that I look at all companies, all investments. If it doesn't meet that quick acid test, gets tossed out. And then what's the risk reward? Does this have 10x potential from here? 10x potential meaning 10x higher over time. And at the end of this video, there's a free investment calculator for you to be able to download. So that way you can play with your own assumptions on what you think of Slack as an investment. But before digging in, if you like trying to find potential multi-baggers or at least joining conversations about companies that can go up hundreds or even thousands of percent over time, hit that subscribe button. And also, if you're interested in learning about my own personal investment portfolio, what I'm buying and selling in any given month, why I'm holding certain investments, and also over time developing exclusive content just for subscribers, go to unrivaledinvesting.com. Also, if you have a question about a particular company that you would like me to look at, first subscribe, but then feel free to leave a note below this video and I'll make sure to respond. So what is Slack, or ticker WORK? It's a messaging platform that largely replaces intra-company email activity. And this should be like, what? Or, oh my God, no emails? What will people use instead? Don't worry, it's not that bad. It's not 100% replacement, but it's the answer is channels. Where you have these, and this is a screenshot of what Slack looks like, where you have these siloed conversations with people you need on a specific subject. And it really is a 10x improvement over email. And that's why you've seen a very rapid adoption of Slack as this new technology over the last several years. So why is Slack a 10x improvement over emails? And the answer is this channel dynamic where, first of all, you can see, here's an example of individual channels here. And the way Slack works is you have these channels, and then you also have direct conversations, which are one-on-one. And you also have like group chats. So group chats are similar to channels. But the reason why channels are super interesting is you can create channels like that, and you can target very specific problems, and you can dynamically set who do you want to have in that. And it's self-selecting. If someone doesn't feel like they're going to add value to it, you can leave. But you can also invite people that you're like, oh, you are a decision maker in this process. You need to be in this channel for any sort of real-time conversation tackling this very specific problem. So it doesn't necessarily just need to be a broad category. It can be very specific questions or problems that a company is tackling. Also, it's a stored repository of information. So it's easily traceable, like what's the key information that everyone needs to solve. If you have a core problem that needs to be addressed, you can pin items to a channel. So that way, let's say a new employee is getting brought on board, they can quickly get access to this channel, scroll back, and easily view it. This is way simpler than going through a multi-email chain that might have forked off at different points and trying to figure out who said what. This is a real-time update. People can edit the conversations. So this is a 10x improvement over email, certainly for intercompany conversations. So high level, this is what Slack does, but what about their business model? This is very high level. I'll get more into their value proposition a little bit later. What about their business model? So their business model is a subscription based, typically monthly or annually. For really large customers, they do have multi-year contracts. But so if you think about Slack's sales, it's the number of paying organizations times by the number of seats in use. So as the company or usage grows, so does Slack. And you can see that in their net revenue retention figure, which is consistently over 100 and which is consistently over 130%. That is a great figure. Not a lot of companies have figures anywhere near that. What does 130% net revenue retention mean? That means that just based on the customers you had at the start of the year, if you have 130% net revenue retention, you will grow 30% that year. No new customers, even including customers that churn and leave. That is a great metric to have, and that metric does reflect that the companies that use Slack are increasingly using it. It's that valuable for them that as they want to bring on new people, they want to make sure they're using it. It's a core part of the business. Now, one should also think like, hey, in times of high unemployment, this could also be a headwind. And this is something management has talked about, where if companies do need a fire, you're not going to need as many seats using Slack. But broadly, you understand the business model of it's recurring revenue on a monthly or annual basis, and it's based on the number of people using it times by the number of organizations that are paying for it. So that's a high level of their business model. The usage is over 700,000 orgs or companies use Slack, 100,000 of which are paid. So this is like a freemium business model. A lot of most of the users are getting Slack for free. And these are generally small companies, like 10 or under employees. But as you get bigger, there's additional functionality that you want to get. That's why you're going to need to pay up for it. Enterprise, which is these mega companies that are paying Slack $100,000 a year plus, that's a lot for getting the software. That's 50% of their sales. So you're thinking these mega companies with thousands of employees that need to have access. So if you're selling to these companies, there's something special about that these companies need. Also, there's also a key point to think about from their growth potential. When you recognize that 700,000 orgs are getting this for free, over 100,000 are paying for it. That means less than 20% of the users are paying, which creates obvious growth opportunities as you sort of look to sell into those folks. Maybe you fine tune certain things, limit the benefits over time. There are levers you can play if the inherent market isn't, if you're not growing fast enough. But growth isn't a problem for them. They've grown very quickly. We'll get more into that in a minute. But here you can see at the bottom, their current tier structure, where you can see it starts off free, then it's $667 a month for the small and medium-sized business, then $1250 a month. This is per user for the larger business, and then they have this enterprise grid, which is based on how many people are using this. So this is super interesting structure. It scales based on the business. What's their total market potential? And management thinks it's $28 billion. That's their estimate for the total workplace business tech for communication and collaboration. It's a ballpark figure. Honestly, you got to take this with a grain of salt. Some CEOs have talked about how this is the last part of their analysis. They open up a bottle of wine, start drinking, and then they come up with these figures. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. But the reality is, in 2020, their ballpark, let's say, ballpark figure of a sub $1 billion in revenue. So it does, from an investment perspective, if they're dominating this market and growing quickly, which they are, that could suggest 10x upside potentially. But in order to dominate the market, you need to have a UVP, or an unrivaled value proposition, and that's a theme I touch upon every investment. What is a UVP? Unrivaled value proposition. The reason why it's so important is it means you have the right to win. It means you offer a good or a service that customers simply can't get elsewhere. And if a customer can't get a good or service elsewhere, they're going to stick to you. And that means you will win in that market. So that's why it's a critical lens to view all investments. It automatically throws out 95% of the companies out there. Does Slack have a UVP? So from a competitive marketplace standpoint, it's a new business technology. They've been around since 2014. So one should automatically go like, okay, it's an evolving marketplace. You need to take this, this is Bayesian updating. You're going to look at this one quarter at a time, updating what your thesis is based on how they're growing, based on the dynamics you're seeing. That's the first part. Nothing set in stone. Second, who are they competing with? And if you read, their S1, you read their 10K, their 10Q, they pretty much call out Microsoft as their main head-to-head competitor with Microsoft Teams. They talk about other collaboration tools, but really the only company that has tried to really clone their product, and put the special Microsoft, evil empire touch on it is Microsoft versus lots of other companies, especially companies that are looking to sell to business solutions. So how do if Microsoft is their chief competitor, how does Slack compete against Microsoft Teams, and what's the history of this competition? So it's what's funny is when Microsoft announced Teams several years ago, Slack took out a whole page ad in the New York Times saying like, "Dear Microsoft, wow, big news. Congratulations on today's announcement. We're genuinely excited to have some big competition." Some competition. Like, hold on a second. Like this, first of all, like you see this skeptical like face. I'm trying to get it down, but like putting out a full page ad to be like, "Welcome competition." It's kind of like that boyfriend that had his girlfriend leave, and so they split up, and so it's like, "Becky, I'm so glad you were able to move on so quickly." Like it rings of that sort of dynamic of of sort of virtue signaling, like, "Oh, it's all gonna be fine. I'm so glad that you're here and you found a new guy." That sort of tone. It's a little like, really? You needed to waste shareholder money on that? I mean, admittedly, it created publicity, which probably helped sales, but still, like, I don't. Then over the subsequent quarter, so that was in 2016, they took out a full page ad. The Stuart Butterfield, the head of Slack, the founder, he talks about how we really haven't seen Teams as a competitor to Slack. They've got to be a little frustrated at this point. So he's sort of like digging in, like, Betsy must be disappointed that her new boyfriend isn't as awesome as me. And they have 250 million-ish Office 365 users, and they've had this massive growth in Teams because they're forcing them to convert to Teams from the Office 365. They're forcing Skype users to convert to Teams, and like they're saying only 30% are actually switching to Teams, and the rest are saying no, thank you. Like, booyah, I'm still the awesome boyfriend. At least this is the analogy that's playing in my head. Like, I'm like, okay. But how is this? So this is how it's progressed. Like, any updates since then? Yeah, in July they announced they were suing Microsoft for anti-competitive behavior. So this is like to continue the Betty or Betsy or whatever analogy. Like, now it's like she's taking a restraining order, or he's like suing her for like, "No, you shouldn't have done that. That was wrong to leave me." Like, this is it's a really bad look to be like, "Welcome to the ecosystem," to "Your anti-competitive behavior. This is not acceptable." So there was a whole little Twitter feed from Stuart Butterfield saying like, "Look, all these top players are still using Slack. Um, it's not Microsoft's like, this isn't the reason why they're suing isn't because Microsoft's really succeeding in converting companies to switch from Slack to Teams. It's that their efforts are trying to prevent Microsoft customers from even trying Slack. And they view that's an anti-competitive behavior because they're effectively marketing it at zero, trying to say, hey, if you're an Office 365 user, they're trying to cut off Slack, below the knees and say, look, we will throw this in for free in order to crush them. And that's sort of the old textbook evil empire approach that Microsoft has taken. And honestly, that's a smart approach. John D. Rockefeller did the same thing with Standard Oil. If one market was profitable, he would use those profits to subsidize another market, which would then crush the competition in that market. That market becomes profitable. You subsidize another market. Boom! Before you know it, you're this evil empire. And so he had this whole long feed saying like, look, Microsoft still isn't nearly as good as us. They have clunky user interface. It's slow. They're not able to handle a lot of the functionality that Slack has. And they also call out that since they put out that one, that full page ad in the New York Times, they're calling out that they have grown over 500%. Their enterprise business has grown 1100%, and they continue to win the biggest companies in the world, saying that we've lost 0% of our largest 100 customers. So that is a big deal. Like that does suggest that, yes, whatever Microsoft is doing, they're still rocking out, but it is a really bad look to have that full evolution of like, hey, welcome to like, we are suing you. So anywho, it makes me concerned, as a small shareholder in the company, but it's something that I'm still, interested in and want to, assess as time goes by. But what about Slack could give them an unrivaled value proposition? So there's a couple of different moving pieces. The first part is ecosystem. So Slack links up with over 2,000 different apps. And think about it like a Salesforce, Zendesk, Google Docs, where as the workflows are completed in these respective apps, you can get pinged directly in Slack to know, oh, this is moving along, you need your input, or this person needs their input. And that creates a central repository of work progress. So that way everyone could be working on the same thing, communicating, hey, I'm having a problem here. So that's immensely valuable. When you have an ecosystem, super important. Being able to operate with multiple different apps, super important. Also, they have custom integrations. They talk about over 600,000 third-party custom applications or integrations within companies' internal software code that's used on a weekly basis. So companies have integrated Slack within whatever proprietary software they're using, and hundreds of thousands are using it on a weekly basis. So this means they're getting ingrained in the DNA of these companies. And I put a little bell there because it's just like ding, 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 ding. When you are getting ingrained in companies, that means like you are sticky. And that you don't generally rip out things that are part of your DNA that really help workflows. So this is this is building the thesis for an unrivaled value proposition. Is there anything else? And the other, and this is a big one, is shared channels. The ability for multiple different companies. So this is no longer just intra-company where you're looking, across multiple departments or all people in one department. This is across companies to communicate in real time in one channel. This is a game changer in my mind. It turns Slack into a social business collaboration tool. It's super important. Like ding, 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 social, meaning like the more people that are connected to your ecosystem, the more people connected to your platform, the harder it is to completely compete with it or to either have a new competitor come in and break it apart. Because ultimately, if you have a lot of different people on the same platform, why would they leave to a startup? Because they know, hey, I'm having all my social business conversations on this app, in this channel. And of these shared channels, 40,000 of their paid, or greater than 40,000 of their paid customers are using the shared channels. Over 90% of their enterprise customers are using shared channels. This is important. Like so 50% of their revenue is from these enterprise businesses. 90% is shared channels. This just reinforces how sticky this is going to be. I mean, this is really reinforcing the idea of an unrivaled value proposition, and it's also growing super quickly. This is something that management updates each quarter, saying, hey, like quarter over quarter, the number of businesses using shared channels grew by like 30%, and it has hundreds of thousands of endpoints. So it's not just these customers, but let's look at all these different channels that are being created, all these different end conversations that are involving these different folks. So here's what Stuart Butterfield had to say. About using the shared channel, where he goes, for me personally, the experience has been kind of magical. I'm in a multi-org shared channel with the CEOs of 15 other SaaS companies, including Shopify, Twilio, Splunk, Atlassian, Okta. In the channel, we have helped each other navigate these unprecedented times. So this is super important. If you have a resource where you can talk with 15 other companies and talk to your peers and get real-time updates and everyone can share and post things, like that's really valuable. Can these shared channels really drive an unrivaled value proposition? Seems like it. I lean towards yes as a shareholder that it does. It's something that I'm tracking as it goes along. For example, using shared channels, like what's the value that you can generate from using shared channels? Slack raised $750 million in 10 days. 10 days in April 2020. This was the heart of the pandemic, shut down the economy. In 10 days, they raised hundreds of millions of dollars. You go back using the John D. Rockefeller analogy, when he didn't raise money, he hopped on a horse, the horse carriage and was going around town talking to different bankers. This was a multi-day affair, and good luck if he was able to do it. And then you'd have to go across towns and go to, travel along the coast to try to find different folks. Like 10 days, because you have the bankers, lawyers, investors, company stakeholders, you have the company's legal counsel, all on the same Slack channel to have real-time discussions. You can no longer have that bottleneck that holds things up indefinitely when it's very clear, like, oh yeah, this is the point that's causing everything to slow down, and everyone can be like, ping, hey, have you seen this message? Why haven't we're all waiting on you on this, and they can clearly give updates of, hey, this is what's going on. The testament of raising that much money in 10 days is exceptional, and it does suggest really strong value from having shared channels where all these companies can communicate in a secure way in real time. And in a world increasingly working across geographies and time zone, Slack is becoming the new social digital office. They're not trying to replace, in-person meetings. One could argue that's what Zoom is leaning towards. And even though Slack does have video conferencing abilities, what they're offering is broader base. It's the new social digital office, which is just so important as you have companies work remotely, across geographies and time zones. So what about valuation? Could Slack go up 10x from here? And my thoughts on Slack regarding the risk reward is that it would be tough to beat 10x in 5 years. I mean, that's a super high hurdle, but could you have a satisfactory investment return from here? And I'm laying out some base, figures from here to sort of show, what this company could look like, in the years ahead. It currently has around a $32 stock price, which implies around a $19 billion market cap. I'm using a higher diluted count based on the converts that they've issued. You can see what the implied growth is for the hypothetical 2020 sales. So I'm giving a range of 40 to 55%. It could obviously shake out higher or lower. And keep on, this 100% of this is hypothetical. Whatever the outcome is of this valuation, stock price can go way higher and go way lower. This is hypothetical. This is a way to do a back of the envelope analysis of what you could pencil out. Then what's optimized margins? It's worthwhile to pencil out that Slack has around 90% gross margins. When you have gross margins like that, even if they're currently operating at effectively a break-even level, when you have 90% gross margins, that generally means you can get operating scale. And it's a software company, so maybe you get 20, 30, 40% operating margins over time. And you can see I've layered in 25 to 35%, optimized margins over time to think about what could this business look like if it were optimized for profit right now. Obviously that doesn't completely jive when you're trying to focus on, hey, let's do a land grab, but long term, what do the margins look like for this business? Slap on a 25% tax rate gets you to net earnings, and you can see it's not cheap based on this optimized margins figure, 74 to 115 times for a company growing around 50%. Not cheap. But then also let's layer in what do you assume the growth rate is in the years ahead? We did pencil out that they could be 10x larger just in size on revenue. But could they grow at 20 to 40% a year? Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're penciling out about 50% growth this year. So you can see the low side is 20%, the high side is 35%. So you can see that by 2025, and this is the investment period over 5 years. You can play around with this yourself, and I'll get into that in a second. But you can see by 2025, it's they've grown either 2.5 to 4.5 times. This is ballpark figures that I personally feel comfortable with using. And then what's the assumed end multiple 5 years out? And you get somewhere between 20 and 30 times earnings multiple that you're slapping on, trying to be, a range of conservative to aggressive. And that gets, upside of about 80%, downside of about 60%, a little under 60%. So it's not at $32 a share, it's not an amazing risk reward at current prices. But if you're a believer in that high scenario and you think, the outcome and the trajectory for Slack is more along the high, then that's why shareholders would own it. But this is a good mental framework for what you should expect. So even though the risk reward isn't amazing at current prices, I own a starter position because I like their value proposition. I like the growth opportunity, and I like management. Like even though honestly, Stuart Butterfield, like I didn't really care for the full page ad for Microsoft. If anything, he's over communicated, saying like, here's why I did the ad. Here's why I changed my mind on how we're going to treat Microsoft. Here's why we're suing them. So I like that level of transparency. He strikes me as a no BS, straightforward CEO. My value proposition to you as a viewer is that I'm sharing this valuation sheet in the description of this video. So there's a free investment calculator that you can download that's in a link below this video. So that way, if you want to say, hey, Daniel, I think Slack's assumptions are way better than this or way worse than that, you can play around with that to figure out what's the price that you'd want to get in or what's the price you'd want to sell Slack shares. So that's my value proposition to you as a viewer. And if you enjoyed, learning about what I'm personally getting into and you want to learn more about what I'm buying and selling, what I'm holding each month, why, go to www.unrivaledinvesting.com, click that journey button, and over time I'm going to add more functionality like exclusive videos that's just for subscribers, like market commentary or commentary about specific holdings. So if you're interested, unrivaledinvesting.com, go to Journey. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button, and if you're already a subscriber, hit that like button. Thanks so much.